what I would call almost silent leadership is that there are leaders, leaders by rank, and they're always going to be there, and there are leaders by people that just do things.
So, Steve, thanks ever so much for coming to the Fireside Chat, being human. This is really about, understanding the journey that you've taken and really kind of getting into the values that you've took along the way and the journey so far. So I guess where to start is probably at the beginning of the childhood, what lessons you started to develop early on, and what was that like for you?
First of all, Nick, thanks for inviting me. As always, pleasure to chat with you. Childhood, I always think I had what I'd call a normal childhood, whatever normal is. And then as you go through life, you realize there's lots of different types of childhood. Grew up in a loving family with a mum and dad, brother and sister, went to the school that was in the town, had an education, we had holidays, and I moved on. And I think that the difference perhaps in my childhood was that I was adopted at a very young age. So a mixed race child in a white family, growing up in Devon. I mean, Devon's not particularly diverse now. It wouldn't, back in the 70s, it was even less diverse. Yeah. So going to a school where you're, one of only two or children of color, you don't notice at a young age, but as you grow up, you do. And I think that the couple of things that you do, you build a robustness. But if you're different, you've got to overcome that difference before you can do whatever you're going to do in that day or in life or that week. So let's take education, for example. You're going to go to school and there's going to be, in the 70s, maybe name calling, people trying to have fun or whatever because you're different. So the first thing I'm thinking about when I go to school is I've got to deal with that before I'm worried about the maths test or the English test or anything else. In my mind, I'm going to school thinking, right, I've got to deal with this first of all. Being different, knowing I'm different, people knowing I'm different. Now my escape was sport. I was okay at sport at school, played in all the sports teams. And so that was where I had my friends. That's where I had my escapism. But in terms of academia, it was a barrier. It was a real barrier for me to go to school worrying about that before I could think about the education. And so you build up this veneer to deal with that and to make sure that, right, that I can push that to one side. And once I've dealt with that, I can get on with whatever I'm going to do next.
I mean, that's when we talk about it now, to understand that what you're going through at that period in your life as a young child, that's quite spectacular to deal with, isn't it? In the sense of you're not really knowing that you're dealing with it.
Exactly.
But you are absolutely self-consciously building this robustness up, or this resilience, in fact. And I guess resilience comes into our world as we go through life anyway. Dealing with resilience through many things. So it fascinates me that, we don't spend a lot of time on that type of subject matter later in life, even in leadership. There's almost this element of, well, they're where they are, and there's no backstory to it. So I think that backstory is really key to understanding how it makes someone shape their life. So if we step forward into kind of like, beyond school and then into, your early career, I know you were in the military. I think what made you kind of go with the military? Was there a defined route to military, or was it just I'm going to have a go at that?
I don't think there was a defined route. I mean, I think a little bit lost at school in terms of what could I do. Obviously, we have those careers interviews, and people came in from the military, and I ended up talking to a guy who's in the Royal Marines, and thought I wouldn't want to go at that. I'll never forget it. Actually, you go in to get interviewed, and there's a big poster on the wall, and it's these Royal Marines in this lovely rigid raiding craft, little boat in the Caribbean, I did 20 years in the Marines. Never once did I get in that boat in the Caribbean. So I was falsely sold there. But yeah, I went and got interviewed, and I thought, yeah, this is me. It's physical. It's challenging. In a way, escapism, I think. Yes, I had a go and was successful, and loved it. Absolutely loved the time in the Royal Marines. The training is very difficult, initially, but you all train at the same place, so you all come out at a similar standard. As you go through getting promoted, you're all going through the same promotion journey. So you may not think that you empathize, but you do, because you've been in that position of the person below you. And as you go further and further up the rank, and there's lots of mentors and things, of people above you, you have a very solid bond with people, which before I'd only known in a sports team, like in a rugby team, but this was a very, very solid bond. And I loved it. And I was able to progress my career naturally through that by just being me.
And that's got to be nice. Almost the resilience has been built up as a child. Now you're into kind of a commanding area where people are on the same journey. That must almost, you mentioned empathy, but you're a pack, effectively. You're a community, aren't you? You've got each other's back. And that's what I've learned from friends who have been in the Marines. There's an element of, that's a community that you don't rock too much. It's quite powerful. So I think from that, it's that element of, that's where the values start to really become true. I would think, the values of the Marines, it teaches you to be, strong, human, have empathy. And I'm guessing that's the kind of route that came out of that, right? The values.
Yeah, I think first of all, teamwork. I mean, that's the most important thing that you found, is that you're nothing on your own.
Yeah.
You've got to have a good team around you constantly. What I would call almost silent leadership is that there are leaders, leaders by rank, and they're always going to be there. And there are leaders by people that just do things, and you just get that and you follow them. Mentoring was superb. Without, again, I call it almost silent mentoring. You just see things and pick things up, and then when you're in that situation 5 or 6 years later, you think back to what that person may have done or how they did it. And even on the negative side, some things that you wouldn't do, perhaps the way you were treated and things, and that can go right back to childhood as well, because you're thinking, if somebody is struggling with something and they're feeling a bit isolated, you can think, well, I know what that feels like. So, but I definitely think the teamwork, the leadership, and the mentoring was,
And name one person who really influenced you within that core of people at the time. What stood out as a highlight for you from a person perspective?
I think it was a guy called Frank O'Neill who was he was a troop sergeant for us when we were in Norway, and also on other operations. And he had this ability, the sense of humor, that he could just tell when everyone needed a lift. He wasn't the most talented person of everybody, but a tremendous leader, a tremendous ability to get people together, and say and do the right things at the right time. But he also is able to sort of empower us. So, if you've got a team of 10 people, and they're not all 10 are good at everything, but he would be able to find out what you were good at. And that's what he would highlight with you. And then somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And so when you put all those things together, you've got a really strong team. And you felt that you were adding something.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, ironically, sense of humor was the one thing that you mentioned there that then led to leadership qualities.
Yeah.
Because again, I think you get so wrapped up sometimes in the actual process and the business element that we forget that sense of humor is being human. It's that whole element of taking the stress away and being able to get your arms around people and make them supportive in a way that it doesn't need to be emotional. It just can be a sense of humor that actually breaks barriers down. So breaking barriers down is an interesting one. It seems to me that, you know, the marine element certainly gave you values, gave you direction, gave you kind of a steer on where you wanted to be. I've known you for quite a few years, and I would say there's a hell of a lot of that is now portrayed in your leadership style, which I think you've already touched on, like elements of silent leadership and, you know, aware of what you're saying and what you're doing in order to get the best out of the individual in front of you. Am I on the right path there? Would you say you've taken a bit of that into what you do now?
Yeah, I think so. I think I really like the idea of building a team. Um, you know, you inherit teams and you build teams, and they're not that far apart. But if you do inherit a team, you've really got to work a little bit harder to get that team to gel if it's not doing what you want to. But yeah, I love the idea of building a team, I think. And then I do like the idea of empowering people. It is sort of, you know, if you've built a team, you know what each of those individuals can do. You know why you've brought them in. You know what you expect of them. Let them get on with it. And then if they just need a little guide here and there, give them that little guide. So I think that definitely comes from the time in the Marines.
Yeah.
You know, you got people got to take responsibility. And also people do have to be a bit robust, you know, because it doesn't go right all the time. Sometimes people need to be told that things, you know, that wasn't right. That's wrong what you've just done. You could have done that a bit better. This is a better way of doing things. But you build that robustness, you build some trust and loyalty. And then if you have that in your team, then having awkward conversations is a lot easier.
Yeah, it's accountability, isn't it? I know we've spoke before about the word, and the actual outcome of accountability is taking ownership of various things. And I think, I don't know about you, I feel there's an element that not necessarily we've lost that in the era that we're in. I think technology's played a massive part in almost melting accountability away.
Yeah.
And I think in order to get that back would be the right steps forward for a lot of businesses out there that you know, either use tech or they've got a younger generation using tech. That accountability element is really strong for me. And I don't know how you feel about that, but it's that element of there's a team element, but we've got to get back to the basics of accountability in order to be successful. I think in an era where the younger generation maybe don't see it as we used to see it.
Um, I honestly don't. I don't really know if I'm honest, but it's changing. You know, I think we look back to COVID times and say that was quite a defining moment in changing how we work, how a team communicates, how someone leads a team remotely. It's different skills. You know, a lot of different skills. You know, when you're in a room with someone and you're looking at someone and you can gauge the room and how people are interacting with each other. But when you've got, you know, 10 squares on a screen and there's a face in each screen and they're on mute when they're not talking and you know, you've got to gauge that and lead. And that's a different type of leadership. And so maybe the younger generation are better than that than we give them credit for. And maybe growing up that way isn't a bad thing if that's the way we go. But that team that's on the screen has still got to be a team. And they've still got to interact, and they've still got to be led, and they've still got to be mentored, and they've still got to be accountable. So how you do that remotely is a little bit more difficult. I mean, the way we've managed to do it currently is that we have, you know, we'll have that weekly call. You know, I'll then have a one-to-one call each week with maybe not even, you know, put it in the calendar. It would just be, oh, you got time for a 10-minute call. And then we meet once a month. Now, obviously, in that time, there are still events going on, activities going on where you do meet people and you do interact. But those things are non-negotiable. We have a team meeting once a week, and we'll have a one-to-one once a week, and we'll meet once a month. and when people meet once a month, we, we meet in the meeting room and we have coffee and pastries. The first hour is just people chatting about anything, family,
Yeah.
kids, football. It's not nothing to do with work. And when you hear that and listen to it and step back, people miss it. The group of people I work with have missed that interaction because that's what I want to spend the first hour doing.
And I think that's really important, Steve, because but it comes from leadership as well. It comes from a scene set of the person who's leading that charge. And I know when I'm going into a different world, but football coaching, I let our kids, and I'm talking 12-year-olds, I let our kids just play for 10 minutes before we even start the session.
Yeah.
Because it's their downtime. They've been at school. It's that. So it's almost like if you move that into the adult world, it's like give them just the space to actually play in their heads for an hour or half an hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is, before the business starts. So there's an element there, I think, of remembering what makes people tick and certainly getting the best out of people. And that comes from leadership, right? It comes from a scene set of the leader in charge, in my opinion. And the values and the kind of way that you structure your world and your life and your leadership is certainly leaning towards how that gets the best out of people. In my opinion. If we took the values that you believe in, could you name some of the values that you've got that you've really stuck with right the way through?
I think integrity is probably right up there. Especially if you're able to question yourself of when you're making decisions or when you've made a decision, really question yourself that is the right thing, even if it's afterwards. Which is in itself being true to your values, I think. Loyalty. But people question loyalty sometimes, don't they? Can you be too loyal, and are you missing things because you're being too loyal? But I do value that a lot if there is loyalty, because that comes with trust and being able to be honest with people. I think is So integrity and loyalty are probably right up there for me.
Yeah.
And then maybe empathy, and maybe it's being able to really empathize and I had to really work on my listening skills. It's a good friend of yours, Keith, actually, active listening, and I listen, Keith, and I'm saying that as I'm butting in what he's saying, which means I'm not listening at all. And he taught me about even if you have to repeat what someone says, just take a moment and even if you ask them to say it again, and then if you get home, you've got to write it down. That is, and I had to work on that. I had to work on sit there as a group and active listening. And like when we have our meetings now, I say to everybody, guys, you've got, when someone else is speaking, just listen. You're all going to have time to speak, and I think that if you can actively listen, it really helps with your empathy. Because you're just taking a bit of time, you're repeating in your head what they said, then you're thinking about why they're saying it and what they're going through. And even if you haven't experienced it yourself, because empathy is great, like I said in the Marines, when you've experienced being a young Marine or a corporal or a sergeant, and so you're empathizing with that rank. But if you haven't experienced, whatever that person is going through, then it's sometimes difficult to empathize. So you've got to so empathy is key for me, but I only get there by really actively listening, which isn't natural for me. I had to work at it.
That's great to hear, because I think we both know Keith really well, and I think some of the elements, again, these softer skills that we seem to be not losing, but not focused on much within businesses nowadays. We tend to be going gun ho for the sale, or we've got to move fast and we've got to shift as quick as we can. These softer skills of showing empathy and listening, and I think are just so powerful in the sense of the direction of travel that businesses can take. How does that look globally for you? I mean, you've worked across multiple territories. What does empathy look like when we're talking to the Middle East, or we're talking to Americans, and do you have to change your style a little bit, or is it naturally that they do acknowledge the individual, or is it a slightly different approach that you have to take from a global perspective?
Um, I think there is no substitute for understanding culture. So, there are cultural diversities that means you do business differently in different regions. It means that you address people differently in different regions, and you may act slightly differently in different regions, but you're still you. So I think you've got to understand, or try and understand, the culture of the territory you're in.
Mm.
Understand the values of the people in that culture and what's important to them. But in terms of, and I think you're hinting on me running different sort of distribution networks around the world, is that it is still key that they know what you expect them to do for you and your company. And how do we get there within your culture and within your beliefs and within the way you do business? And in some instances, I haven't got there. And I've had to say, guys, we're too far apart in what
Mm.
we're trying to do here. But other ways, it's a real challenge for me to then to go back and think, right, I'm based in the UK, I'm working for an American company, and I'm trying to get somebody in Saudi Arabia to represent us. So how do I make that work? And that's the joy of the job, if you like.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge. Um, and if you're able to bring those three things together, it's you feel very rewarded for it. Yeah.
And would you put? I think personality is really important in that type of role as well. So I think how you are built and how you are human is a really important part of working on a global scale. So you mentioned there about almost being agile in the sense of understanding culture, but still driving the same message that the business wants. So there's an ability there to be agile as your personal self, but also to understand that accountability comes back into it for what they're trying to achieve or what you are trying to achieve from them. So I do think it's really, what's the one lesson that you would give anybody looking at going into a global or an international role that you would want them to work at beyond the kind of active listening and a culture? What kind of skills would you want to see coming from someone working in that field?
Questions don't get any easier, do they, Nick?
I'm trying my best, mate.
So I think you have to have a real clear understanding of what success looks like. So what does success look like for your company? What does it look like for you? And then what does it look like for your partner, your distributor? So if you understand what success looks like for all of those three, you can then help and build that distributor or that partner to be successful. Because if they're successful, they're happy. Um, I think that's sort of jumps out at me is
Mm,
what I've had to do
mm,
is understand, because success isn't the same for everybody. Um, and the only other thing I'd say is if I was employing someone to sort of kind of global role, really embrace it, really embrace the travel, the different cultures, the understanding of people, be personable. Um, because you should enjoy it. If you enjoy all of that, eh, that's probably 70% of the way to success.
I was going to say enjoyment is so important. I mean, we've both done it
Yeah.
and probably embraced it and enjoyed it along the way. And I do always go back to almost the life skills that you gain from a little bit of travel. I think I've always recognised that if you've either lived abroad or you've worked abroad or you you've had experiences where you've been traveling for work, I do think it rounds you much more as an individual, and really, I guess, laser focuses on the values that you bring as an individual, what your values are. It really sets them apart. Um, I guess that the one thing from me uh, that I think I've seen from you is you mentioned listening. I think that's a key ingredient of what you do really well, and that's a compliment.
Thanks.
But I also think your ability to really understand people is another element that I see. What is it that you're looking for in an individual that would fit into a team? What's them skills, and what's them kind of character skills that you're looking for in an individual if you're going to pop them into a team, or develop them for a long-term plan?
Um, so predominantly I've worked with smaller teams. So, 20 and under people, I guess. So agility is important in a small team, and flexibility, that you might have a role, but that role will migrate into other things. And um, communication, I think, is key. I need someone who can communicate uh, to to other members of the team and to people outside of that. Um, and then people who have the ability to learn and develop. So, you don't always need to finish article, but you do need to look at somebody when you bring them a team and thinking, where could they be? Where could they be in 5 years' time? What could they be adding to this company in 5 years' time, or to this team in 5 years' time? So I think that's beyond everything else. That's what I would be looking at, is that agility, um, that communication, and that ability to learn and develop.
And I think that is a brilliant summary of the things that we look for in individuals, whether it's part of a team, that the person with agility or is agile in their approach, that willingness to learn and develop, and then communicate in the right way, is just genius. That's almost the three takeaways I would bring forward from this fireside chat. I think um, that is so powerful in its methodology of how we get people, to be more than just a leader. It's that rounding out of the experiences that they bring to the table. Um, and if there's one thing, Steve, that you would literally leave on today, if we were to sign off, what would be the one message that you would send to anybody who's, I guess, developing their skills or developing their values? What's the one thing that you would give as a senior leader signing off for the day? What is it that you would give, that one piece of kind of mastery, or um, or good luck message? What would it be?
Um, I think, if to answer that, I look within. I think, and what would I had liked someone to said to me a while ago, and I think it would just be, enjoy the moment. What will come, and you will get there if you really want to get there. But don't forget today. Really enjoy the moment, and enjoy what's around you, what you're doing, the team you're working in, the people you're visiting, the travel you're doing, and don't worry too much about where you want to be in 20 years' time.
Steve Wright, been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Nick, as always.